The storm came suddenly, fierce and unrelenting, blotting out the road in front of me. Sheets of rain lashed against my windshield as thunder growled overhead, a low, menacing sound that rattled in my chest. My car's headlights barely penetrated the gloom, illuminating a winding road framed by skeletal trees. My GPS had lost signal miles ago, leaving me to rely on an old printed map I'd stashed in the glove compartment, an artifact of my tendency to over-prepare. I was supposed to meet my friends at a lakeside cabin, a weekend getaway to celebrate my recent promotion. But now I wasn't even sure I was on the right road. The storm had knocked out cell service, and I'd passed no signs of civilization for nearly an hour. When I first saw the hotel, its shape looming against the hillside, I thought it was a trick of the light. The building was enormous, its facade a patchwork of stone and weathered wood, with steep gables and narrow windows that gleamed like shards of ice in the rain. A neon sign buzzed faintly above the entrance, Ashmere Inn. I hesitated, gripping the wheel. The place looked like it belonged in an old horror movie, the kind where the guests check in but never leave. But the rain was coming down harder now, the wind howling like a wounded animal. My car was low on gas, and I had no idea how far the next town might be. Sighing, I pulled into the gravel driveway. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a single rusted sedan parked near the entrance. As I stepped out of the car, clutching my jacket against the icy rain, I felt the strange pressure in the air, a heaviness that settled over me like a damp blanket. The lobby was eerily quiet. The interior was surprisingly grand, though it had the faded elegance of a place long past its prime. A chandelier hung from the ceiling, its crystals dulled with dust, and a massive fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold and empty. The air smelled faintly of mildew and something sweeter, like decaying flowers. Behind the reception desk stood a man in a burgundy vest and a too-perfect smile. His hair was slicked back, and his pale skin seemed almost luminous under the dim light. "Welcome to the Ashmere Inn," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "You must be in need of shelter from the storm." I nodded, brushing rain from my sleeves. "Do you have a room available?" "Of course." He slid a leather-bound ledger across the desk, its pages yellowed and curling. "Please sign your name." I hesitated, glancing around the lobby. The place felt off. There were no other guests, no signs of staff bustling about, and the man's gaze was just a little too steady, as though he were studying me. But the storm raged outside, and I had no other options. "Sure," I said, scrawling my name in the ledger. "Room 313, he said, handing me an old-fashioned key attached to a brass tag. "Take the stairs to the third floor. Breakfast is served at 7 a.m. sharp." The staircase creaked under my weight as I ascended, the sound echoing through the empty halls. The wallpaper was peeling in places, revealing patches of damp plaster, and the light fixtures flickered weakly. By the time I reached room 313, I felt an inexplicable sense of dread. The door looked like all the others, scuffed wood, a tarnished brass number, but something about it made me pause. The air here was colder, and the faint scent of decay was stronger. Shaking off my unease, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was small but functional, with a single bed, a wardrobe, and a writing desk. A large mirror hung on one wall, its surface tarnished with age. The window rattled in its frame as the wind howled outside, and the rain drummed steadily against the glass. I dropped my bag on the bed and sank into the chair by the desk. My phone still had no signal, and the Wi-Fi password scrawled on a card by the bedside didn't seem to work. Frustrated, I decided to call it a night. But as I lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The sound came just as I was drifting off, a faint, rhythmic tapping. At first, I thought it was the rain against the window. But as I lay there, heart pounding, I realized it was coming from the wardrobe. I sat up, my breath catching in my throat. The room was dark, save for a sliver of moonlight filtering through the curtains. The wardrobe stood in the corner, its doors slightly ajar. "Hello," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The tapping stopped. I waited, every muscle in my body tense. When nothing happened, I slid out of bed and crept toward the wardrobe, my bare feet silent against the floor. My hand trembled as I reached for the door handle. I yanked it open. The wardrobe was empty. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As I turned back toward the bed, I caught a glimpse of movement in the mirror, a shadow darting across the room. I spun around, but the room was empty. The next morning, I headed to the dining room for breakfast. The receptionist's perfect smile greeted me as I passed the lobby, but there was no sign of other guests. The dining room was a cavernous space with high ceilings and long tables set with mismatched china. A single man sat near the far wall, hunched over a plate of eggs. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken and bloodshot. "Rough night?" I asked, sliding into a seat across from him. He didn't look up. "You shouldn't have come here," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "What do you mean?" He glanced around, as if afraid someone might overhear. "This place, it's wrong. People check in, but they don't check out." Before I could press him further, he stood abruptly, leaving his half-eaten breakfast behind. Back in the lobby, I found a stack of pamphlets detailing the history of the Ashmere Inn. The hotel had been built in the late 1800s as a retreat for wealthy travelers, but had fallen into disrepair after a series of mysterious deaths. Rumors of hauntings had plagued the inn for decades, and it had changed ownership several times, each new proprietor abandoning it after a few short years. The final entry in the pamphlet caught my eye. Warning: the Ashmere Inn is not liable for any unexplained occurrences or disappearances. Guests enter at their own risk. Over the next 2 days, the strange occurrences escalated. In the middle of the night, I would wake to the sound of footsteps pacing outside my door. Objects in my room shifted positions when I wasn't looking. A glass of water moved to the edge of the nightstand. A chair turned to face the mirror. And then there were the whispers. They started faint, barely audible, like the rustling of leaves. But each night, they grew louder until I could make out fragments of words. "Help us. Get out. It's coming." On the third night, I decided I couldn't stay any longer. I packed my bag and headed for the lobby, determined to leave, storm or no storm. But the lobby was empty, and the front door wouldn't budge. Desperate, I wandered the halls, searching for another exit. That's when I found it, a hidden staircase behind a tattered curtain leading down into the basement. The air grew colder as I descended, the faint scent of decay growing stronger. The basement was a labyrinth of stone corridors, lit by flickering bulbs that cast long, eerie shadows. At the end of one corridor, I found a massive iron door. It was slightly ajar, and beyond it, I could hear the faint sound of chanting. I pushed the door open, revealing a cavernous room filled with robed figures standing in a circle. In the center of the circle was a gaping hole in the floor, its edges jagged and blackened as though it had been burned into the earth. The chanting stopped as the robed figures turned to look at me. Their faces were pale and expressionless, their eyes black pits. Before I could run, one of them stepped forward, pulling back his hood. It was the receptionist. "Welcome, Daniel," he said, his too perfect smile widening into something unnatural. "We've been waiting for you." I don't remember how I got out. The next thing I knew, I was stumbling through the rain, the Ashmere in a dark silhouette behind me. My car started on the first try, and I sped away, not daring to look back. When I reached the cabin, my friends were waiting for me, their faces etched with worry. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words wouldn't come. Later, I searched online for the Ashmere Inn, but found nothing. No records, no reviews, not even a location on the map. Sometimes, I wonder if it was all a dream. But at night, when the rain falls and the wind howls, I hear the whispers again. And I know the Ashmere Inn is still out there, waiting for its next guest.